And another one came. Yuki and I were writing our stories at the library again, but that being said, Yuki was doing all the actual writing, while I was scrapping one idea after another. Everything I came up with either resembled something else too much or was way too long or vague to write out. My thoughts were cut off when Yuki asked me to read the continuation of her story. I took a moment to appreciate the embarrassed expression on her face before glancing down on the pages of the notebook. By using her left arm, the girl could move by dragging herself across the wreckage. It was slow and cumbersome, and once before, the girl had stumbled down from the mountain. But she could feel no pain or frustration, for she was only a machine. The only thing left in her mind was to search for her missing parts in order to complete herself. Various mechanical parts laid scattered across the mountain of wreckage. Some of them were huge while others were tiny and delicate. Only some of the parts would fit, while others had to be discarded. The story seemed to be progressing. While the girl's fate was lonesome, there was still some hope. If she were trying to complete herself, what would she become? I thought to myself. Seems like it's going somewhere. Think you'll be able to finish it? Instead of answering, she turned away, gazing into the distance and clutching her knee. When she finally answered, she spoke with an absent-minded tone.
It's like the words are being forced out of me. I don't know where they come from, but it feels as if they have always been inside me.
An awkward silence followed as she continued gazing off to the distance. I had the feeling that maybe I had asked something I shouldn't have. Oh well, at least you've got something to write. Meanwhile, I'm just throwing out one idea after another. It was like she snapped out of something as she turned back and hurried with her words.
Maybe you're being too hard on yourself. If it's just a short story, maybe you could write about a personal experience or a journey of some sort.
I'll give it a try. Thanks.
No, it wasn't much.
Perhaps she was right. Maybe I had been trying too much. When I gave it all another thought, it hit me. I knew what I was going to write about. When I finally got started, I finished the whole story in one sitting. Maybe that was because I was only writing about myself, and so there was no need to think. This is something that happened about 3 years ago when I was 13 or so. Why am I writing about it now? Maybe part of the reason is that I'm really embarrassed of myself when I think back to those times, and writing about it like this could make it seem as if I had grown up and learned something. But when I think about it, I'm not all that sure if I'm any smarter these days. To start this story, back then I had the habit of taking the local train and riding all the way to the last station. Sometimes I'd walk to the abandoned buildings, linger around the industrial district, or just take out my bicycle and pedal as far as I could. If someone had stopped me to ask what I was actually doing, my answer would have been something along the lines of, to seek solitude. Apparently I thought there was something cool about being alone. Well, this incident was something like that. In my town, there's this huge abandoned radio tower. While it has no use, they still haven't taken it down either, so it just stands there, gazing over the little town where nothing happens. The said radio tower was located on the outskirts of the town, on top of a small hill. That's why you could always see the tower wherever you went in this little town. It was surrounded by a fence, so common sense would tell you that entry was prohibited. Of course, that wouldn't stop someone like myself. I had been making preparations for days now. While I knew how to enter the tower and how to climb up to the top, there was still the problem of being seen. There was only one solution. So when the night came, I took my flashlight and sneaked out of the house, heading towards the outskirts of the town. It was 2 a.m. on a weekday, so the streets were completely empty. I didn't want to be seen by anyone, at least by an adult, since they probably wouldn't understand all this. The old chain-link fence that surrounded the tower actually had a small hole in the back, so there was no need to try climbing over it. The tower itself was not much else but metal structures. A ladder was located inside the structures, and finally there were a few platforms, probably used for the maintenance purposes when the tower was still in use. The whole structure was painted with red and white paint that had started to show its age. The metal bars were laid out in the shape of triangles and squares, while the whole tower stood maybe 20 to 30 meters tall. Well, it's now or never, I thought, while staring at the metal pole that reached towards the sky on top of the tower. And so, my trip upwards started. Thanks to the various lights on the town, it wasn't really all that dark, but I was still pretty careful while I climbed the ladder upwards ever so slowly. There was a distinct metallic sound every time my feet hit the ladder, and I struggled to concentrate in order to maintain my cool and not look downwards. Soon enough, I reached the first platform, which was pretty much the halfway point on this ascent. No need to stop, just keep going, I told myself. But it was obvious that I was already starting to have second thoughts on this whole idea. It was getting harder and harder not to look down. I tried closing my eyes, but it clearly wasn't the smartest idea. I almost lost my balance on the very next step. I settled on staring at the ladder itself, taking it step by step, and eventually I reached the top. Well, not so much the top of the tower, but the last platform. The metal antennas strapped on the mast stood higher still, but this was as high as I could climb. I slumped down on the platform, leaning against the structure and let out an empty sigh. Thinking back, what was on my mind when I settled on this idea? Probably something like a lone warrior gazing down from the highest point. Well, there was nothing even remotely cool about this solitude, just a scared kid that had climbed a bit too high for his own good. I could probably understand that much even back then. It was just then, when I noticed it for the first time, that there was something downright magical about it, but I was just way too focused to notice all this earlier. While I had learned that each of the tiny lights was supposed to be a star, not much unlike our own sun, this was probably the first time I really thought about it. I wondered how many planets like ours were out there, or what the people up there might have been doing. Little green men, data life forms, AIs, alternate realities? Staring at this view of near infinite space, it felt like anything was possible. Suddenly, I felt like that realization alone had made this climb worthwhile. Though on the next day, I found out that I had managed to catch the worst cold in my entire life. I guess that's what you get for sneaking out at night. As I wasted the precious days of my summer vacation lying in my bed, I decided that solitude, or whatever, wasn't really my thing. In the end, the whole thing was sort of meaningless, like a long-winded skit with a punchline that didn't really sink. But for a newsletter, I guess this would do. If this doesn't get someone thinking, I can do better than that. I guess nothing will.
Isn't it fine? I think I really like the part with the starry sky. It's really nice to have dreams like that.
Ah, well, I guess it'll do.
Anyway, I wanted to thank you.
Eh? That's a bit out of nowhere.
No, I've always wanted to write stories together with someone. So, being in this club is, really important to me. But it's important to me. So, thank you.
Well, either way, with my little episode complete and Yuki's story still underway, gathering at the library to review our stories became a routine of sorts. It was during one such a day the following occurred. Today, Yumi was having one of her more normal days, as in her sister was nowhere to be seen, and to your average person, this girl would have looked like any high school girl. That's when I noticed it. I had already become an existence outside the normal world, just by being around these two. Since if I were to believe her, then I'd be witnessing telepathy, the existence of the spiritual realm, or something along those lines in action, pretty much on a daily basis. Well, I guess I wanted to believe Yumi and her story on Yuki, but still, this being reality and not the world of fairy tales, stuff like that just wasn't supposed to exist. While I thought of all this, Yumi herself was writing her part of the newsletter. Unlike Yuki, she was writing straight on paper with very little hesitation. What would a girl like her write about anyways?
Hey! No peeking!
Eh?
It's none of your business what I'm writing.
Well, that kind of figures.
Nah, actually, I was only kidding. But it's kind of boring when you're hardly even curious.
Well, sorry for not meeting your expectations. So what's the story about?
Here, let me show you.